episode 2 of Games Mania. I'm your host, Tom Parry, and this time I'm going it alone. But hopefully we've got an entertaining and informative show for you today. We're going to start off with a little bit about gaming news. Here I need some sort of jingle, but I'll jump right into it. Big news this week for retro game fans. Sega have announced 10 more games for their Sega Mega Drive mini console. Now this is continuing a tradition that's been very successful for Nintendo of releasing miniature versions of their classic consoles. A few years ago there was the mini NES console, and going forward they released a mini Super Nintendo console. Both did amazingly well for Nintendo. Now Sega have jumped on the bandwagon. Before the NES Mini and SNES Mini, Sega did also enter this territory, but they were subcontracting this console to another company, and unfortunately the result wasn't very good. Nintendo have really caused Sega to step up their game, and the proposed Sega Mega Drive Mini is looking absolutely fantastic right now. There'll be a total of 30 inbuilt games on the console. It's going to be HD ready. They've released 20 of these games now. 10 more released recently, which included such fan favourites as Mega Man The Wily Wars, and previously they also mentioned, I think, Contra Hardcore. Both these are classic Sega Mega Drive games from Konami and Capcom respectively, and they're also incredibly expensive cartridges. So it's a perfect opportunity to pick these games up, because the Sega Mega Drive Mini is, I think, going to cost around £70 when it comes out. And of course, in the States, it's going to be called the Sega Genesis Mini, because that's a console was known over there. So yeah, looking forward to that later on in the year. Also, you may have remember, if you think back to last year's E3, the massive gaming press conference that goes on, a game called Skull and Bones was unveiled, and this was coming from Studio Ubisoft. And unfortunately, that game's been cancelled. Skull and Bones was going to be a huge open world pirate game that did look pretty good, similar in a way to the pirate elements of Assassin's Creed games like Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Ubisoft did look to expand on that and create a fully fledged pirate game. I guess the only other competition for that at the moment would be Sea of Thieves, exclusively on Xbox One. But unfortunately the creative director left Ubisoft late last year, and as far as we know the game has been delayed indefinitely and won't be at this year's E3, so bad news for those looking forward to that one. Big news that just dropped recently was Sony and Microsoft are working together to improve cloud storage solutions for streaming. So this could be in a direct response to Google having announced the Google Stadia console, which is going to be a totally streaming gaming platform. So Microsoft have some great cloud streaming technology. They've joined with Sony to both use this same technology. So it really is a huge change for the industry, because of course Microsoft and Sony being the two biggest, and of course Nintendo, but Microsoft and Sony particularly have had quite a big rivalry, of course, Xbox One, PlayStation 4. So it's great to see them working together, but you kind of know why, and it's probably the Google Stadia, which is threatening their dominance over the console market. So that's just a few of the big news stories that have been dropping lately in the gaming world. The next thing we're going to move into is a topic for this episode, and that's going to be the state of games as they are now. So I'm 32, and I've seen games evolving since I started playing when I was at primary school, and things have changed, some for good, some for bad, in my opinion. Just right now, I feel maybe the video game industry is becoming a little bit stale. It's certainly changed a lot, and the big games are things like God of War and Red Dead, which are spectacular experiences and definitely very good games. In fact, Red Dead was the best reviewed PS4 game ever, I think. But there's other games as well, which you've got your yearly FIFA games, always huge. Yearly wrestling games as well, but are we seeing much evolution in games? A good example of a lack of evolution would be maybe the Assassin's Creed series. Fantastically popular, been going forever. But how many times can we sort of replay the same sort of scenarios in a different time period? Uh, Back when I played games, of course, play games more. The industry was quite a lot different, and it was really evolving. I think we've really reached a point now where it's hard to imagine where we can go from here. And it seems like a lot of developers are playing it safe nowadays. They know what people want, and they're recycling old themes over and over. And if you really want kind of fresh gaming experiences, you're going to have to look to maybe more independent games, which there are many of, but now the market and what is in the public eye has certainly shifted to the more high profile releases, and everything's just kind of getting a little bit stale in my personal opinion. I'm not someone who plays a lot of these blockbusters myself, purely because they take a lot of time. I love experiencing games like the latest Red Dead, or as I mentioned before, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn. That's just to name a few PS4 big blockbuster games. But have we all got the time to play things like this? I certainly am not someone who sits there for hours on end and plays a video game. I do enjoy video games. I jump in and out of loads of different games. And I feel like to get more fresh and exciting gaming experiences, I'm looking more towards the indie games. But of course, they need a little bit more... people need to know a bit more about them and be aware that they're out there. Because outside of, I guess, the more hardcore gaming community... we're not really, people aren't really getting exposed to these indie games in such a way, because that's where I feel where the real evolution in games design really is. Also with modern gaming, I feel there's quite a fair few frustrations, namely nowadays if you were to buy a physical game, the disc itself is really just a unlock mechanism for the game. So it has to install the game mostly all to the hard drive, which leads on to another problem, that you've only got enough space for a certain amount of games. Back in the last generation of consoles, the Xbox 360 and PS4, now especially with the 360, you're able to pretty much play a game straight off the disc. You have the option to install. An install would only take about 7 gig. Nowadays, you're looking at installs of up to like 100 gig. So you've really got to be aware when you buy a console, you see it's got a 1 terabyte hard drive, and then you have to really think how many games I'm actually going to be able to fit on there. Everything's got an update all the time, so when you go to play a game, you're really excited about playing it, you're going to have to wait maybe a few hours to play the thing, depending on your internet connection at all. So as much as technology has moved forward and been able to give us fantastic, visceral experiences, for example, Red Dead, it's also gone back a step in that these things aren't as accessible to us. I don't know if this is creating more of an interest in retro games and why the NES Mini, the SNES Mini, and the forthcoming Mega Drive Mini are becoming so popular, because people want direct access to fun experiences that aren't necessarily going to involve hours and hours of gameplay. But that's my perspective on that part of the gaming industry as is at the minute. Be interested to see where we go to in the future. I mentioned earlier about the streaming. We might see a preference from big companies like Sony and Microsoft for game streaming. Microsoft have already released a discless Xbox One, which was relying totally on you downloading games to play them. But is there such a difference nowadays when, as I mentioned before, you stick a disc and you have to download the game anyway before you can play it? But the bigger question is this setting up for pure streaming consoles in the future? Now, I think Sony have already mentioned that their next PlayStation will still use discs, which I, for one, am quite happy about. Often, when you're buying a game, it's still cheaper to buy a physical version than a download version, unless it's on a sale, for example. So to have the option of buying physical discs, I think, is still pretty important. But it's also obvious where things are going with the future there and streaming. So yes, I definitely think in the future we're going to see more games streaming. Whether or not companies will take the leap, like Google have, and dedicate an entire console to just playing games like that, it's difficult to see. But I think we've perhaps lost some sort of, we're gaining some accessibility, but lost maybe the ability to play the games the way we want to play them. Uh, but yeah, I'll be really interested to hear what thoughts you guys have on this. Are you happy with the way the games industry at the moment is, or do you prefer how things used to be back in the day? My favourite time of gaming was probably the N64. Now that's partly based on nostalgia and the kind of games I used to play there, but there was a certain accessibility to them. With cartridge-based games, you just had to plug them in and then you could play the game, which I think is definitely preferable. But of course, cartridges didn't have the kind of space on them to give you these kind of massive games that people expect. Now, people expect open world games like GTA and Red Dead and all of the above. But yeah, we have to there's always compromises to make. But the Switch is a nice example of a cartridge-based system. It still does have to install things in certain cases, but it's nice to see that Nintendo are still there, being reasonably traditional with the way they distribute their games. Nintendo themselves, they are pushing more towards digital downloads as well. And the recent Nintendo Direct, they offered an offer to their online subscribers. As Nintendo Switch now, if you want to play that online, you need to pay a subscription. It's not as much as the Sony Microsoft equivalents, but one of the bonuses they're offering with this subscription now is discounts on games. If you're to buy 2 games digitally from the Nintendo eShop, and you are also a subscriber to the online service, then you can also get reasonable discounts on these games. So even Nintendo there are doing things to kind of, because that's the way it seems to be going, but be interested to hear what you guys think about that. Do you buy your game digitally, or do you prefer to go into a shop and buy a physical copy? If you're big into gaming, then and space is always an issue. I'm a collector myself, and the amount of space that I've got taken up with cases for games is immense. But then again, if I was to buy everything digitally, it might be more expensive, and I might need to keep buying so many hard drives. I've got 3 external hard drives plugged into my Xbox One at the moment, or out of all sides of it, and it's just it's not the best way of doing it. I think these console manufacturers need to look at installing bigger hard drives in these systems going forward if digital gaming is the way they want to take the industry. So that was our feature for this week. Again, do let us know if you have any thoughts on that. We're going to move on to a section we're calling Game of the Week, very imaginatively, and it's going to be a retro game this week. Did anybody have a 32X for their Sega Genesis or Mega Drive? This was an add-on for the system which allowed you to play games more colours, better graphics, even 3D graphics in some cases. It didn't do very well, and that's probably why not many people are familiar with the add-on for the Mega Drive, but it had some interesting games for it. One of those games was Knuckles Chaotix. Now, Knuckles is a character from Sonic the Hedgehog, first introduced in Sonic 3. Knuckles got a spin-off game on the Sega 32X, and a weird game it is too. On its surface it looks like a platform game, like Sonic for instance, but you're always tethered to another player. Knuckles holds a ring and so does the other player, and you're always connected. It's sort of like in Sonic 2 where you can play Sonic and Tails, but Sonic and Tails would be connected and you can only move when you kind of drag the other player along. It's a very odd gameplay mechanic, and you use it for some of the game's puzzles, and it throws you around, and it's a very colourful game. It's probably some of the best 2D type graphics you might see from that console generation. Initially it feels rather frustrating, and you're kind of scratching your head why Sega went down this direction for this installment in the Sonic series. But the more you play it, the more it kind of grows on you, especially if you try playing it in 2-player mode, which I would recommend. It's a not particularly challenging game, but it's a fun and chaotic experience, and I think Chaotix is probably the the reason why they chose that title was probably because of how the game plays. Uh, it's a little different than Sonic in the way you progress through the game. There's about 25 levels. Each level has 5 acts to that level. So there's definitely lots to play through. But you access them all sort of randomly. So you hit a button that tells you which level you're going to be playing on, and then you proceed to play on that level. It's not like a linear progression. For example, like you move from level 1, level 2, level 3. You kind of get mixed up every time you play it, which is different. And you choose from Knuckles can choose from several other companions on his adventure. These are called the Chaotix crew, and they consist of a crocodile, an armadillo, a bee, and a chameleon, each with their own unique ability. So depending on who you choose, you can kind of tackle the game differently. An example of how the team mechanic works is you may be stuck and you can't get through an entrance. You need to throw the other player at a switch in order to open the door, or for example to get up a steep slope you may have to sort of slingshot yourself off the other character by telling the character to stay in their position where you run forward, you let go of a button, catapulting your companion to the next part of the level. So yeah, it's a really interesting game, and I really recommend playing it. There are ways to play it without having a Sega 32X, but so whatever way you try and play it, I would just recommend getting out there and giving it a go if you're a fan of platform games. It's a really odd one that not many people may have played, so I really like to just recommend that as Game of the Week. That's Knuckles Chaotix for the Sega 32X. Now, moving on to further game recommendations, I've been playing quite a few Switch games lately. The Switch at the moment has a fantastic sale on where you can get a lot of digital-only games for very cheap. One of these would be, I made a little list here, my picks of these right now would be Yono and the Celestial Elephants, which is a heck of a mouthful, a crazy title for a game. It's an isometric adventure type game. By isometric I mean you view it from a top-down angle. You play as an elephant who's on an adventure. It's incredibly cute. The gameplay plays very similar to Zelda. As you go around talking to people, you enter sort of caves, like dungeons in Zelda, and you have to do various puzzles, block puzzles, push things around. But being an elephant, you've got special elephant abilities, like you're able to blow things with your trunk, or you can suck up water and water flowers. These things all play a part in the game's puzzles. It's an utterly charming game and very cheap at the moment on the Nintendo Switch. Another great one is Goner. Now Goner is one of these roguelike games. It's a 2D platform action shooter type game. And by roguelike, what I mean is it's all randomly generated. So your character will enter a room, there'll be a load of enemies to dispense with, and every time you play, that room and those enemies will be in different places. So it's a kind of pick up and play game. You see how far you can get in the dungeon. If you die, you go back to the beginning. What's so great about Goner though is its art style. It's really beautiful. It's kind of a minimalist style that it's got, but it's utterly charming and is a joy to play. And basically the gameplay involves going from room to room, shooting all the enemies and getting into the next room. Of course the enemies' movement patterns are all different. You gain various power-ups as you play and as you get further and further on in the game. It's a game you really have to see to appreciate, because it is relatively simple on the surface, but I'd recommend it, and again, rather cheap at the minute. Another couple of games that are worth playing and available in the Switch sale at the moment are Atomic, which is, what do you call that? It's another 2D scrolling game where it's like those endless runner games, you know, where you tap a button to jump on a platform and you have to time your button taps in order to proceed. But the idea is you're in a jetpack and you just have to sort of like tap and shoot as well. There'll be enemies in your way as you progress and you have to shoot them, and it's very easy pick and play game. Again, it's got a cool visual style. And lastly, Mimpy Dreams, which is a really weird title again. Basically what it is a platform puzzle game where you play as a little dog called Mimpy, and you interact with the world using the actual Switch screen. So it was originally developed for tablets, I think. So you'll have to like spin things on the screen to progress into the level. It's got a charming sort of storybook type quality to it. It's quite a simple game. It's good for young kids, and again rather cheap. So that's what I've been playing on the Switch recently, and I can really recommend all those games, and you can pick them up at really affordable prices. So moving on now to new releases. This week we definitely have a lot of retro stuff going on. Earlier on in the week though, Tuesday, Rage 2 was released. Rage 2 being the sequel to a game that came out ages ago on Xbox 360, I think PS3 as well. It's the first person shooter in an open world. It's that's a hard word to say, isn't it? Post-apocalyptic. So the world is very similar to something like Mad Max. The shooting itself is very reminiscent of Doom. And you also travel around the world in a buggy. And it's got a driving section as well. It was a very good game, a game that I enjoyed back in the day, but I don't think it was that successful. It must have been successful enough to receive a sequel though, because Rage 2, was released earlier on in the week. It's been getting great reviews. How it differs from the game that came before, it's a lot more colourful now. The reviews have been saying that the gameplay is satisfying and the shooting is very similar to the last Doom game. So if you've played that more recent Doom game, you'll have an idea what to expect from the actual shooting. But the world itself is maybe a little bit barren, and maybe the game goes on a little bit too long. And again, this kind of length of game thing, I think, is a bit of a problem in modern games at the moment, because you're kind of doing the same thing over again. And my experience was with the recent, well, not so recent now, but when Tomb Raider came back and they did a reboot of Tomb Raider. Now, I played through that game and enjoyed it. It wasn't the longest game, but the actual gameplay it grew a bit stale after a while. You know, you kind of get a little bit fed up with doing the same thing over and over and over again. And they feel like they have to stretch out these games to sometimes even something like 60 hours. A lot of that would be optional gameplay. Maybe the main story would only be maybe 11 hours or something. But I, for one, get tired of doing the same thing over and over again for maybe 11 hours. And I personally prefer just to play a shorter game that if it's going to tell a story, it's a story that I can sort of experience within a short space of time. Anyway, we're off on a tangent there. Other games released this week are more retro in flavour. Castlevania Collection was released on Xbox One, PS4 and Nintendo Switch. Now this Castlevania Collection is pretty cool. Now Konami have also recently released a shooter compilation which included things like Gradius, which is our classic side-scrolling shooter game. Now they've moved on to one of their huge franchises, which is the Castlevania franchise. First appeared way back when on the NES, and then Castlevania 2 and 3 on that console. Castlevania 4 was on the Super Nintendo, so these are games going back quite some way. This compilation is really comprehensive. It features all those games from the NES and the Super Nintendo, but also includes two of the Game Boy exclusive games, which is the first time you've been able to play them anywhere other than the Game Boy. And we also have a Famicom game. Now, over in Japan, the NES was called the Famicom, for those not in the know, and there was a game over there released called Kid Dracula, which was sort of a parody of Castlevania, where you played as a cute Dracula character. Now that's also included in this compilation. And also, one of the rarer games in the compilation, which is very difficult to get as a physical cartridge nowadays, is Castlevania Bloodlines, which was originally released for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis back in the day. And this is a great and affordable way to just play that game. It's probably worth it for that one alone, but if you've not played Castlevania before, this is a perfect place to get into the franchise. It's got vampires, monsters, well, it's got everything you can think of if you're a horror fan, and so if you like 2D platform adventure games, then you really must try out Castlevania. It's available now for I think $15.99 on all formats. I personally wait for it to get discounted, as I do with most things, but because I do have access to some of those games originally, which if you're a fan of retro games, you you probably already have a lot of those games already. Guilty Gear 20th Anniversary is also released on the Switch this week. What this comprises of is the original Guilty Gear game, which was a 2D fighting game that first appeared back on the PlayStation 1. It had a rock soundtrack, it had beautiful 2D graphics, it was very fast, very anime flavoured, very over the top. It was very different from Street Fighter at the time. Street Fighter Mortal Kombat were probably the most popular franchises back then. And Guilty Gear really gave you something fresh. Since then, it's had numerous sequels. In this 20th anniversary collection, you're getting the original Guilty Gear, and you're getting the last version of the last 2D Guilty Gear game that was released. Now, I can't for the life of me remember the exact title of it, but it's Guilty Gear XX Reload, something like that. It's the last version they're releasing. It's probably the best one you can play of those 2D series. Of course, Guilty Gear's now moved on to 3D rendered games, which are fantastic. But if you want that retro 2D flavour, then you can go back and try out Guilty Gear 20th Anniversary on the Switch. If you buy it soon, it's available with an art book, which is really nice to get. And make sure, if you're a fan of Guilty Gear, to pick it up as soon as you can, so you can get that version with the art book. So there's some of the big new releases this week. Of course, next week we've got Team Sonic Racing, which is released for the Xbox One, PS4 and the Nintendo Switch, which is a sequel to Sonic Racing Transformed. The Sonic Racing series has been really good and a great sort of competitor to Mario Kart. So if you like Sonic and you like Mario Kart style multiplayer kart racing games, then I'm pretty sure that Team Sonic Racing, Team Sonic Racing. Sometimes I get confused and think it's called Sonic Team, but that's another story. But that's out next week, so that's, I think, definitely going to be worth picking up. So that kind of brings us to the end of the show, really. I hope you've enjoyed this format for the show. It's a little bit different than last time when we were talking with Kieran. Definitely want to do that again. And have a discussion on Detective Pikachu, and we've also talked about discussing video game movies. So if you like the idea of that, do let us know. We really want to go in depth with the movies and how video game movies have evolved or not really evolved. It's up to you, and up until the release of Detective Pikachu. So if you like this show, you may be interested in checking out a little YouTube channel I help run called Blast Process. It's on my t-shirt. It's worth typing that into YouTube and checking out that channel. I do quite a few videos on there. I do regular live streams of me playing games. So some of those games I've mentioned here in the show, you'll be able to check out me playing some of those games over on the Blast Process YouTube channel. We also have a website, that's blastprocess.com. That might be an easy way for you to get to the material faster, so you can check that out as well. I also, on there you can also check out another gaming podcast I do called Tom and Matt Attack, which is a little bit different than what we're doing here with Games Mania, but you may enjoy that as well, because it's equally as games orientated. So that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen and watch, and really hope you're enjoying this show. And do let me know if you like the show format, if you feel that there's any changes that might be needed in it, or just if you have any comments on some of the games and some of the topics we've discussed in this episode. We'd love to hear from you. So all left for me to say is thanks again for watching and listening, and until next time, game on.